Srimad Bhagawatam, 3rd Canto, Chapter 15, Text 8, and we'll read Text 8 together, and I'll go up to 14, Text 14. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Yasya Vacha Praja Sarva. Yasya Vacha Praja Sarva. Gavas Santyeva Yantrita. Gavas Tantrita. Haranti Balim Ayatas. Haranti Balam Ayatas. Tasmai Mukyaya Te Namaha. Tasmai Mukyaya Te Namaha. Yasya Vacha Praja Sarva. Gavastantyeva Yantrita. Haranti Balim Ayatas. Tasmai Mukaya Te Namaha. Yasya Vacha Praja Sarva. Gavastantyeva Yantrita. Haranti Balim Ayatas. Tasmai Mukaya Te Namaha. Yasya Vacha Praja Sarva. Gavastantyeva Yantrita. Haranti Balim Ayatas. Tasmai Mukyaya Te Namaha. Others?
Yasya Vacha Praja Sarva.
Gavastantyeva Tantritaha. Haranti Balim Ayatas. Tasmai Mukyaya Te Namaha. Yasya Vacha Praja Sarva. Gavastantyeva Yantritaha. Haranti Balam Ayatas. Tasmai Mukyaya Te Namaha. Yasya Vacha Praja Sarva. Gavastantyeva Yantritaha. Haranti Balim Ayatas. Tasmai Mukyaya Te Namaha.
Yasya Vacha Praja Sarva.
Gavastantyeva Yantritaha. Haranti Balim Ayatas. Tasmai Mukyaya Te Namaha.
Okay, word for word. Yasya, of whom, Vacha,
by the Vedic directions, Praja, Raja,
living entities,
living entities,
Sarva,
Sarva,
all, Gava,
Gava,
bulls,
Bulls.
Tantya,
Tantya,
by a rope,
Vairo,
Eva,
Eva,
as,
as
Yantrita,
Yanchita,
are directed,
are directed,
Ranti,
Paranti,
offer,
offer,
take away,
take away,
Balim,
Balim,
presentation,
presentation,
ingredients for worship,
ingredients for worship,
Taha,
Ayataha,
under control,
under control,
Tasmai,
Tasmai,
unto him,
unto him,
Mukyaya,
Mukyaya,
unto the chief person,
unto the chief person,
Te,
Te,
unto you,
unto you,
Namaha,
Namaha,
respectful obeisances.
respectful obeisances.
Translation: all the living entities within the universe are conducted by the Vedic directions. As a bull is directed by the rope attached to its nose, no one can violate the rules laid down in the Vedic literatures. To the chief persons who has contributed to the Vedas, we offer our respect. Please repeat. All the living entities
All the living entities
within the universe
within the universe
are conducted by the Vedic directions.
are conducted by the Vedic directions,
As a bull is directed by the rope
as a bull is directed by the rope
attached to its nose,
attached to its nose.
no one can violate
No one can violate
the rules laid down
the rules laid down
in Vedic literatures.
in Vedic literatures.
To the chief person
To the chief person
who has contributed the Vedas,
who has contributed the Vedas,
we offer our respect.
we offer our respect.
Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The Vedic literatures are the laws of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One cannot violate the injunction given in the Vedic literatures any more than one can violate the state laws. Any living creature who wants a real benefit in life must act according to the directions of Vedic literature. The conditioned souls who have come to this material world from material sense gratification are regulated by the injunctions of the Vedic literature. Sense gratification is just like salt. One cannot take too much or too little. But one must take some salt in order to make one's food stuff palatable. These conditioned souls who have come to the material world should utilize their senses according to the direction of the Vedic literature. Otherwise, they will be put into a miserable condition of life. No human being or demigod can enact laws like those of the Vedic literature because the Vedic regulations are prescribed by the Supreme Lord. Text 9. Sattvam vidas vitsam utmas tamasa lupta karmanam adabar daya disja panam arshishikatam. The demigods prayed to Brahma, please look upon us mercifully, for we have fallen into a miserable condition. Because of the darkness, all our work has been suspended. Because of complete darkness throughout the universe, the regular activities and engagements of all the different planets were suspended. In the north and south poles of this planet, there are sometimes no divisions of day and night. Similarly, when the sunlight does not approach different planets within the universe, there is no distinction between day and night. Isha deva tatir garba ujikashyapam arpitam dishyastimarayan sarva vardat hatte ganir eva dahasi. As fuel overloads a fire, so the embryo created by the semen of Kashyapya in the womb of Diti has caused complete darkness throughout the universe. The darkness throughout the universe is explained herewith as being caused by the embryo created in the womb of Diti by the semen of Kashyapya. Matre uvacha sab prahasyasya mahabaho bhagavan shabdaguchara Pratya Chastatma Burdevan Prinan Uchiraya Gira. Sri Maitreya said, thus Lord Brahma, who is understood by the transcendental vibration, tried to satisfy the demigods, being pleased with their words of prayer. Brahma could understand the misdeeds of deity, and therefore he smiled at the whole situation. He replied to the demigods present there in words they could understand. Brahma uvacha manasa me sutayu smat purvaja sanakadaya chur vidayasya lokal lokeshu vagati spraha. Lord Brahma said, my 4 sons, Sanaka, Sanatan, and Sanandan, Sanat Kumar, who were born from my mind, are your predecessors. Sometimes they travel throughout the material and spiritual skies without any definite desire. When we speak of desire, we refer to the desire of material sense gratification. Saintly persons like Sanak, Sanatan, Sunandan, and Sanatan Kumara have no material desire, but sometimes they travel all over the universe, out of their own accord, to preach devotional service. Ta ikara bhagavato vaikuntasya malamana yayur vaikunta nilayam sarva loka namaskritam. After thus traveling all over the universes, they also entered into the spiritual sky, where they were freed from the material contaminations. In the spiritual sky, there are spiritual planets known as Vaikuntas, which are residents of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and His pure devotees, and are worshipped by the residents of all the material planets. The material world is full of cares and anxieties. Any of the planets, beginning from the highest down to the lowest, Patala, even living creatures must be full of cares and anxieties, because in the material planets, one cannot live eternally. The living entities, however, are actually eternal. They want an eternal home, an eternal residence. But because of accepting a temporal abode in the material world, they are naturally full of anxiety. In the spiritual sky, the planets are called Vaikuntha because the residents of these planets are free from all anxieties. For them, there's no question of birth, death, old age, and disease, and therefore, they're not anxious. On the other hand, the residents of the material planets are always afraid of birth, death, disease, and old age, and therefore they are full of anxieties. Vasanti yatra purusa sar vaikunta mutaya ye nimita nimittena dharmin nadrayan harim. In the Vaikuntha planets, all the residents are similar in the form to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They are all engaged in devotional service to the Lord without desires or sense gratification. The residents and the form of living in Vaikuntha are described in this verse. The residents are all like the Supreme Personality of Godhead Narayan. In the Vaikuntha planets, Krishna's plenary feature as four-headed Narayan is predominating. Deity is a predominating deity. And the residents of Vaikuntha Loka are also four-handed, just contrary to our conception here in the material world. Nowhere in the material world do we find a human being with 4 hands. In Vaikuntha Loka, there's no occupation but the service of the Lord. And the service is not rendered with a purpose. Although every service has a particular result, the devotees never aspire for the fulfillment of their own desires. Their desires are fulfilled by rendering transcendental loving service to the Lord. Om Yantimirandasya Gnanjana Shlakaya Chaksu Unmilitam Vitasmashi Yurenma Sri Chaitanya Manovistam Shapitam Nidabhutle Svayu Kudamayam Tadanti Svapantikam Vande Ham Shri Guru Shri Tapadakam Lam Vaishnavam Shri Rupam Shaktitam Sarakna Tam 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 Sajivam Sadvetam Sadhutam Krishna Sitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padaha Sunamalita Shri Vishakam Vitam Cha Hey Krishna Kruna Sundur Deva Mandal Jakapate Gopisha Gopikanta Radha Kanta Namaste Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radha Vinadineshwari Vishvan Sudhi Devi, Harpanami Harapure, Vancha Kalpachubhascha Kripasinudhivacha, Vitanam Padmibro, Vaishnava Namanamaha. All the living entities within the universe are conducted by the Vedic directions. As the bull is directed by the rope attached to its nose, no one can violate the rules laid down by the Vedic literatures. The chief person who has contributed the Vedas, we offer our respects. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming to Srimad Bhagawatam. We'd like to welcome Sharva here today. He's visiting, and he's come all the way from DC, Washington DC, for Rath Yatra. So we appreciate him being here. He did much service here in Hawaii for a long time. So we're glad to have him here. So,
Angie Tabrata, who's
Oh, by the way,
putting it
Sundar,
without him, we wouldn't be having Rath Yatra.
that's right.
and it's Sundar's birthday today.
Happy birthday, Sundar.
So everyone can maybe call Sundar.
Anjai Gopal.
So many persons, so
Back
many,
to the mainland.
so many great personalities.
Deja vu, man.
So here we talk about the descriptions of the kingdom of God. And what's very significant here is that the Vedic literatures of the laws of the Supreme Person of Godhead, one cannot violate the injunctions given in Vedic literatures any more than one can violate the state laws. So you see that so many people are bringing so many laws within the United States, within the world in so many particular ways. And what to speak of spiritually. So we can understand why the world is in such distress, because one is most people are not following the rules or regulations given here. And by following these rules or regulations, as is given here within the Vedic understanding, that one can perfect one's life. So for the conditioned soul, Srila Prabhupada has come in to deliver the conditioned souls and give us, particularly you find Westerners, a brand of Vaishnavism that one can actually take to, one can practically apply one's daily life. That the idea is that one doesn't have to give up what one's doing in this life, but one just dovetails one's abilities in Krishna service and therefore becomes spiritualized. There are so many spiritual aspirants, particularly when you go to India, and you find the jnanis and the yogis, and they engage in so much austerity and difficulties to attain just the right moment. And even then, through all the difficulties and austerities that most people cannot do, that the best they can attain is impersonal liberation. Where herein, Prabhupada makes it very simple and easy for us. As we follow this process of hearing and chanting and coming to the morning program, and continuing to apply as much Vedic culture or Vedic rules or regulations in one's life as possible. And one reaches a particular mode. As we understand in the Bhagavad Gita, the Bhagavad Gita talks about different modes of energy, right? Of goodness, passion, and ignorance. So, particularly in the West, people tend to be in passion and ignorance, and then there's some goodness there. So, particularly in Western developing countries, they're in the mode of passion. They're trying to produce a particular product so they can have great wealth or live very comfortably. This is the emphasis on Western culture, is that enjoy as much as possible. And sometimes there's that kind of philosophy that he who dives with the most toys wins, right? So the idea is to enjoy as much as possible, to get a good job, have a nice house, have a family, so one can engage in sense gratification and all these particular activities. But we find in time and time again that people are very unsatisfied. And sometimes people can't put the connection together. They just continue in a different form of mind's material energy, right? If it's not, drugs or alcohol, they may try to do something like shop as much as possible. Let me have as many material things as possible. Let me have a particular position that'll make me important, people will respect me and worship me to a particular extent. But even these people are trying to find some sense of gratification through this endeavor. but they're becoming frustrated again and again and again. So here, and sometimes when you even mention the word rules, right? People get a little nervous in anything it may be. And one has to know, according here, to apply it properly, right? One, as Prophet states here, that one needs a certain amount of enjoyment within this material world, but just enough to one can continue in one's devotional service. So it's regulated. Sense gratification is regulated to a certain extent, particularly within the Grihastha ashram, that it gives a license for some sense gratification. But one must be very thoughtful in how one engages in that particular sense gratification, and one should use it to try to advance spiritually. This is why we have the Varna and Ashram. The Varna is to talk about one's particular abilities, and the Ashram is one's social status. So we have to find within that Varna Ashram system where we fit. And so for some of us, we may have to engage in some sense gratification activities simply to get out of the system. You know, sometimes the best way to give up something is to engage in it, so one can reject it altogether. So everyone needs a particular, in the conditioned state, everyone needs a particular level of sensory gratification. But even we find in other traditions, like we find one of the most famous ideas in Buddhism, or is that Gautama, Siddhartha Gautama, the title of the Buddha, that he emphasized in the philosophy is the middle way, right? He had renounced his kingdom, and he came from a very wealthy family. He was coming from Vedic culture. He was born into a Kshatriya ruling class, and he had enjoyed so many things before he decided to give it up, to actually understand what the actual world of life is. And so he engaged in all these activities, and then when he had actually gave up the kingdom to pursue spiritual life, that and during that time there were all types of different types of transcendentalists and yogis and jnanis, and so he had studied with the best of the best, and he had mastered all those particular schools of thought, and they all wanted him to lead their sangha, but he wasn't satisfied with any of that. And so he went to an extreme, to the sense of denying his senses, where he said that he actually started hanging out with the extreme renunciates. And so they thought the ultimate goal of life was to attain liberation. And it was to renounce anything. So they went to extreme austerities, so much so that he fasted for over 30 days, maybe longer than that, maybe like a week, a month and a half. And he came to the point to where he was almost about to die. And then he realized that this is another form of kind of sense gratification, that I'm trying to enjoy my renunciation, but actually I'm just becoming more and more frustrated because I'm just thinking about being hungry. And so he gave that up, and at that time, when he was in deep meditation within his fast, there was a girl that had some rice and milk that she offered him, and then he took on that. And as soon as the renunciate saw him do that, they just saw, he's a bogus personality, because this was the whole the ego of the tapasis, is that it's all about renunciation. If anyone engages in the slightest amount of sense gratification, reject them. But they could understand that to a certain level he had reached enlightenment, that there was something that was attractive about him. So he was actually be able to pursue him. But then he came to the understanding that it's actually the middle way where one can understand spiritual life. That he had come from extreme opulence and sense gratification to extreme renunciation. And through the idea of the middle way, that one can satisfy one's senses, but not so much that to pursue spiritual life. So it's very relates to this particular verse, in that we have to have particular renunciation, and that's and what Prabhupada has given us is the hearing, chanting, remembering, rising early, chanting one's prescribed rounds, and engaging everything that one does in Krishna service. And so Prabhupada has actually made it very simple for us. All we have to do is engage in these, as one may even say, austerities, but they're not necessarily austerities if they're done right. Chanting the holy names, one can find great satisfaction than chanting these names of God. So one should not try to engage in overly endeavor of austerities, and at the same time one should engage too much in sense gratification and try to enjoy the senses. Otherwise, one will break either way. It's kind of like when you're working out in the gym, that if you don't lift enough, then you're not really going to get a workout. And if you lift too much weight, then you could hurt yourself. So one has to find one's particular weight. Just one should actually try to push oneself every day further and further in incremental ways of engaging in spiritual life. And so similarly, when one's working out, one has to increase the weight in order to get benefit. So we should always try to be pushing ourselves in Krishna consciousness, and actually in some sense feel uncomfortable. When one is feeling very comfortable in one particular sense, one may not necessarily be pushing oneself enough. One has to feel a little discomfort in order to kind of grow more strength. But if it's too much, then one may break in that particular way. Also, I guess the example is also given of a fine-tuned instrument. It may feel like a guitar. If the guitar is, if it's too loose, you can't play anything, right? And the strings are too tight, then the strings automatically break. So similarly, we have to continually push ourselves in a gradual way so we make a steadily advancement in Krishna consciousness. And if we don't try to push ourselves to a certain degree, then we may just stay where we're at. So the healthy mindset is that one should be very balanced in everything that he does. I think it even describes in Bhagavad Gita that one should engage in sadhana bhakti process, and also one should have a regulated amount of recreation. One has to take care of one's body. One has to do everything in a regulated fashion. But the whole point is why we're doing these things, to engage in Krishna service. And we have to, everyone is different in that particular way. Some can take more austerities than others, and then some may not. Some may be able to study more, read more. One may be able to do a particular service that others may not do. So when everyone has to see, on an individual level, where they're at. One should always take daily stock. Sometimes the ancient Stoics, one of their things is they would always, before they took rest, is they would think that, what have I done today? Have I done something to benefit another? Have I done something that has made me closer to understanding the nature of reality? So one should take daily stock when one takes rest and thinking, what have I done to try to advance in Krishna consciousness? And more importantly, what have we done to help another, right? We understand in the process of bhakti yoga, then we actually help others come to spiritual life. We're actually helping ourselves. Sometimes when one is caught up in one's mind and senses and the disturbances of the material world, one can think about oneself too much. But one of the automatic ways of feeling satisfied, even if one's in a disturbed state of mind, is to go out and help another, right? Because you're kind of taking a break from having to deal with the mind and senses and helping another person. And by helping that person, we actually help ourselves. So we should see this Krishna consciousness as that we have to take a balanced, kind of mature approach in everything that we do, right? We have to take care of our health, we have to take care of our sadhana, we have to maintain ourselves in whatever it may not be. But everything that we're doing should be through the purificatory process of the Vedic injunction, and to so where we could become self-satisfied in Krishna consciousness, and we can make gradual progress back home, back to Godhead. Are there any questions or comments? Sharba.
Well, since in case of Goswamis, they would sleep like 2 hours and they would move. So it looks like if somebody is so absorbed in Krishna consciousness and is extreme tapasya, is that how it works?
Well, when you talk about the 6 Goswamis, they're very special personalities. Again, it's all about where one's particular level of Krishna consciousness as that. So for great personalities, for liberated souls that aren't conditioned, their only desire is to hear Krishna Katha. They're unsatisfied with anything at all, so much so that they dedicate themselves to the process of Krishna consciousness in a very intense way. Like we understand Raghunath Das Goswami would sometimes only eat food that was regurgitated rice coming from a cow. Or like I think Raghunath Das Goswami would also drink like a half cup of buttermilk every other day. And then he was solely satisfied with that. Because these are great personalities on very high levels of Krishna prema. They're resting Krishna at every moment, and they're seeing Krishna moment in everything that they do. And so because they're so fixated on Krishna and the pastimes of Krishna, they have no desire for anything else. They've come to a very liberated, the highest stage that one can come to. And ultimately, when one comes to that particular level, he does give up all his material desires. He gives up everything because he's so enwrapped in the bliss of Krishna consciousness. So those are very special personalities. They were never conditioned. They were liberated personalities. They came here to liberate the world and to give knowledge in Krishna consciousness. So they're in a very kind of special category. Most of us, at least myself for sure, I still have problems just chanting Hare Krishna without offenses. So for me, I have to regulate myself to the rules and regulations, and hopefully maybe within many, many lifetimes, I may be able to take birth in a devotee family, or I may be put in a better situation in my next life. So Prabhupada is kind of talking to the average conditioned soul, right? He's still attached to the body and senses and everything around him. And so Prabhupada has given us a way to actually liberate ourselves in a very simple, very basic way. That, as it said, that Krishna consciousness is simple for the simple, and it's complicated for the complicated. So anybody can engage in this process to make gradual advancement and ultimately reach back to Godhead. And Prabhupada wanted everyone to go back to Godhead. That's why he pushed people so much, that he encouraged them within this life, go back to Godhead, because you don't know. Even if you're born in a particularly good situation, there's always, temptations. Sometimes we find not always, but sometimes we may find people born in devotee families, they don't take a full benefit of the situation that they may have, and they may not even appreciate it. Sometimes when you are living in the temple and you're able to see the deities all the time and you're able to engage in Krishna consciousness 24 hours a day, that sometimes within our minds, we take it for granted, right? We take things for granted. We don't sometimes understand how good we have it in particular situations. That we, for people that are in temples, it's a very special opportunity to be able to be in the temple and always be engaged in Krishna service, or at least always have the opportunity to do so. But that's the nature of the mind, right? Even in any situation, many people can be put in many great situations, but it's the nature to take things for granted. And then once you don't have it, you tend to actually appreciate it much, much more. So we have to simply just let our minds kind of get out of the way, because the mind is always accepting and rejecting things and saying, well, actually I like Krishna, but maybe, I'm not ready now, let me just enjoy a little bit more here and there. So the mind is always trying to play tricks on us, right? It's always trying to give us some kind of detour from Krishna consciousness. But we're so fortunate that we can actually associate with the great personalities like the 6 Goswamis, like Srila Prabhupada. We have the opportunity of senior devotees that we can actually associate and perfect our lives and go back to God in this life. But even if we can't be in the temple, if we can't engage in 12 hours in devotional service 12 hours a day, we should try to do something in any small amount, of incremental amounts of devotional service to our benefit, because it goes to our spiritual bank account. And if we don't go back to God in this life, we'll be right in our next. Kusha.
I just wanted to make a comment, because this little section of verses is really beautiful, because you can see the demigods are praying to Brahma. They're saying, please help, this place sucks, it's getting all dark, and we're being affected. We have been affected by the mistake of deity. We're suffering. We've got it's darkness, and even our service is interrupted. They're like upset about it. So the comment that I'd like to make is, if we make mistakes, it doesn't just affect us, it affects a lot of people. And here the demigods they're saying, Lord Brahma, help, help. And they don't really know the big picture. They have no clue that this is like supposed to happen, and there's actually a good reason for it, and the Lord is going to incarnate, and there's going to be this epic Leela that happens. They don't know. And that's one of the things I do often is I pray, Lord, could you just clue me into how it's your mercy earlier on, because I don't get it. I'm suffering and I'm overwhelmed. But I know it's your Leela. Could you just tune me into it a little bit faster so I can flow with it better, But so the demigods are in the dark, and they're saying, I'm in the dark. They're in the dark, and their service is interrupted, and why? But there is something much greater going on, and there is a big picture. And even the demigods are messed up. Even they are confused. What to speak of us little teeny earthlings, little human beings? We're so tiny, what do we know? So somehow there's some epic giant thing happening, like Lord Jagannath's Rath Yatra, that's way bigger than us. And we just have to get out of the way and go, we know it's your mercy. Like Rebecca's been saying, it's all about mercy all the time. We just don't know what the mercy is yet. So that's my comment.
That is wild stuff.
It's a wonderful comment. We should see, this is instructive. And so it's that, first they're seeing darkness all around them. They're seeing these difficulties. And really, that's how we have to see the material world. In the material world, there will always be difficulties. Sometimes there always are within our conditioned mind, we're trying to, figure out a way to hide the difficulties, or go around the difficulties, or pretend they don't exist, or don't acknowledge them. And the problem is, when you deny reality, even though it's very difficult as it is, you're not able to deal with it properly. You don't know how to go through it. So one should understand that sometimes when difficulties arise, it actually gives us the greatest opportunity for making great spiritual advancement. When the things are always going nice, there's no real room for improvement, because you think, well, everything's great. What do I need to improve, right? But generally, if you lose something, or a relationship's broken up, or whatever it may be, that one is kind of introspective, naturally become introspective of, what should I do different? What did I do wrong? How do I improve this situation? How do I improve myself? Why? These are the questions that come out. We see this within society, like 9/11, or these difficult things that happen. On a worldwide basis, everyone becomes kind of internal. They try to think of, why would something like that happen? And they kind of be introspective. The problem is that it doesn't last long. People go through tragedies and difficulties, and they just kind of forget about what has happened. But we should see that any difficulties that come our way are actually great opportunities to advance in spiritual life. We should actually see them as purifying moments, and actually helping us to advance in spiritual life, no matter how difficult they are. And if we actually have that frame of mind, and we're seeing in that light, we can go through anything, any difficulty. We see that, these difficulties are coming to purify myself and to make great spiritual advancement. Let me tackle this head on. And we actually are accepting reality for what it is, and not trying to deny it and trying to make it the way we want it to be. Then we can understand it better, and we can advance nicely in spiritual life. So thank you for that very nice comment, Ruja.
Krishna.
Okay? Srimad Bhagawatam. Ki Jai.
Bravo.